How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to the Barely There podcast. Another exciting episode covering your Chicago Bears. Be sure to follow us on not Facebook. Don't have a Facebook. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Barely There Pod. Be sure to follow us on YouTube. Look up Barely There Podcast. You'll find us. We're the Jagoffs with the paint logo. Which I'm actually really proud of. I love our fucking paint logo.
I like that little.
And I always will. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. You know, if you are in the prehistoric era, whether you're pounding your head against a coconut and you're listening on Google Play, whatever you got to do to get the music or get the podcast in your ears, we appreciate it as always. But anyway, it's quite a bit to cover. Obviously, last time you guys would have seen us would have been the draft live stream. The two-nighter, always a blast, of course. Loved everybody that we had on. Always a good time just kind of talking shop with the Bears, kind of doing it a little bit more or less of a set format, as set as me and Lucas Perfetti, can be. But, it's always great seeing those guys. We've covered quite a bit, but we're going to try to hone in a little bit with some of the guys that we really like, as well as some other stuff. But, of course, I am joined, as always, by the Ayatollah of Capicola, Lucas Perfetti, 46. As always, I'm Duke Coughlin. That didn't change. Lucas, how are we feeling, buddy? Obviously, it's been a couple weeks. Kind of got some hot takes to simmer. How are we feeling about Chicago Bears, bud?
I mean, they're better, right? You should be better with 3 second-round picks and a top 10 pick. They're better. I don't know, man. I did see an interesting stat, and I think it was Warren Sharp that came out with the stat, and it was pretty much like points for or against teams that have an advantage with extra rest days, and the Bears lead that category by a wide margin. So I guess that's good. Everyone, it's hard to decipher right now because everyone says the schedule is weak and the NFC is weak, and I get the array and the appeal of the AFC quarterbacks. I mean, especially with Rodgers joining, you have Herbert, Mahomes, Burrow. Like, we get it, right? That's not even naming all of them. Lamar, fucking Allen, like the list goes on. Even fucking Mitchell Trubisky, Trevor Lawrence, right? Like it's a long list of very good quarterbacks, and I didn't intentionally leave anyone off because I don't think they're good. Because I do think they're stacked in that nature. But when you look at last year, I think the NFC was one game over 500 in interconference play. So I think the NFC, it was something like 41-40 or something like that. But they won one more game in the NFC versus AFC matchups. So I just feel like, hey, the big dogs are still the big dogs, and that's the Chief. And yeah, no, Duke must have just gotten his hair cut. That's what it looks like a lot. And then everything else kind of falls in line. We don't know how good the Jets are going to be. We don't know how good the Packers are going to be. Jordan Love could be good. So everyone's saying that the NFC is weak. I just don't know if I can buy that right now, just because like the NFC is built to be a bit tougher, right? Like you look at the defensive lines in the NFC are really appealing, and maybe every team in the AFC West has a couple splashy edge rushers, but you're talking about like really deep defensive lines, teams that are built to run the ball a lot more, play action pass. It's two different, you kind of go after the head of the leader of your division and the leader of your conference in order to kind of build your roster, right, to get to the Super Bowl and then eventually win that Super Bowl. So a lot of teams are building to beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the AFC for the last like 5 years now, right? Like he's been around for the better part of a half decade, dominating that whole time as well. So it feels like the teams are a little bit weaker in terms of running the ball and playing the run. And then usually in the wintertime, when it's playoff time and you're not in a dome, those teams prevail that are built a little bit tougher, right? A little bit more upfront. So that's my thought. I guess I just went off into a tangent, but it's just so hard to really say like how good the Bears are going to be, right? I think their win total set at 7.5. The team got a lot better. Let's see if, there's still some glaring holes.
Well, I think 500, like just kind of going off the last topic there, because I mean you did bring up quite a bit. I think 500, hovering around 500 should be the goal for the Bears this year. Obviously, you need this leap from Justin Fields, which I obviously, I'm a huge Justin Fields guy, and I think he's the guy he can be able to do it. But like with how much talent we've now surrounded him with, both in the trade market and in the draft, it's kind of the time to really put that together. And, you know, I think a lot of people would be accepting of a season where Justin Fields shows his true dual threat potential with weapons, and the Bears hover around 500, maybe even sneak into a wild card game. You know, I mean, if we got to watch it on Nickelodeon again, I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. You know, we're kind of veterans for the Nickelodeon game, but
Peacock game too.
Yeah, the $100 million Peacock game.
Fuck
Like
that.
I remember seeing I had that like pop up on my phone. My eyes fucking popped. I was like, holy shit, $100 million for a team that's probably should have won their division and a team that's just gonna get absolutely clapped. So, but yeah, no, I think
NFL's shady, just shiesty as fuck for that, man.
Yeah, no, the NFL's just shicey as fuck anyway. We've talked about this, the Bengals and the Chiefs, but I don't want to go down that road again. But you know, 7.5 for the Bears, that overlooks decent. You know, it's all about bringing it together. You know, when you bring in a lot of players, you know, I mean, the Bears have kind of kept the general formula of what the Bears were last year. Like as far as like the more talented players on the roster, obviously we didn't gouge really anybody. You know, besides, you know, midseason trades and stuff like that, but that's not really counted to my point. But for the most part, we brought in a lot of new guys and a lot of talented like a lot of really talent-starved positions, and we're going to need these guys to step up immediately. You know, we're going to need DJ Moore to look like a number one receiver. Like we can't really wait on that. You know what I mean? We got to hope Darnell Mooney comes in looking the same that he did before injury, but you know, he got the update today that he looks pretty good. You know, Chase Claypool, like we can't play this. He's learning the playbook anymore. You know, like he's a guy that's going to need to show up. And you know, like there's a lot of moving parts here. People have to be a little patient with this team, but we cannot accept really anything short of like a 7-win season where Justin Fields looks incredible, like genuinely, you know, even if the defense, which I think the defense is going to look pretty damn good this year, especially with how we beefed up front. And I think when you have that type of young talent coming in, a guy like Justin Jones probably starting the season as a starter on the defensive tackle position, that doesn't hurt nearly as much as potentially could have had we not addressed that position. You know, but it's going to keep fresh bodies in there. And that's really a problem we had last year because we just could not afford to not have our best guys on the field because our depth got kind of depleted on the front seven. You know, our secondary looks really, really good. We're going to talk about some added pieces to that, but you really just cannot accept a 5-win season. You really, where Justin Field continues to struggle. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't want to just highlight Justin here, but like, we need to show something here. You know,
this year it's more so about him than the team. It seems like I will say it kind of dawned on me that Eberflus didn't always have a ton of talent in terms of the defenses he coached, but he always did have defensive tackles and linebackers for the most part, right? When he was successful. So who knows? Maybe they think that they can kind of patch this defense up together because they have improved a ton on defense. Like, let's be real here. Even as someone who wasn't in support of the kind of the Edwards and Edmonds switch for Roquan, like, not going to go back down that road, but the reality is the Bears got a lot better on defense. Maybe they're not completely stacked and ready to win a Super Bowl, but they got a lot better. And I guess we should try to opt in and to the idea that Matt Eberflus can make it work with this much talent, right? Like, there is quite a bit of talent in terms of the defensive backfield. You have a really deep defensive line. I mean, you drafted fucking 3 defensive linemen, signed 1. Justin Jones was probably your only real capable starter. Still got a couple young guys. Edge is rough, right? But it is a lot deeper in case of injury. And if they do want to rotate and have guys be fresh all the time on the defensive line. But when it comes to the Fields point, like, yeah, they did enough to help Fields. Like, would it be more ideal to have an all-pro left tackle and an all-pro center? Sure. But like, they got him a receiver. Tyler Scott was a very low-key addition where we'll get into him because I like him a lot. And I didn't even look into him that much pre-draft for how much I looked into everyone pre-draft. But I think that's like a really nice piece that's going to help Fields throw 3 or 4 bombs this year, right? And 3 or 4 bombs changes your total stat line. 3 or 4 60-yard bombs for touchdowns takes your touchdowns from 25 to 29, and your yardage, you add an extra 240 yards or whatever it is. What's 6 times 4? 24. Oh, that was good. I did that math right.
Look at that, Mr. fucking math guy over here.
But yeah, like that's a lot when you really think of it in the grand scheme of things. And I do think that they have invested a fuck ton in the wide receiver room. They have invested number 32 overall pick. They invested that swap for number 9 overall, right? You're talking about moving off of the number 1 overall pick because DJ Moore was involved in a trade. Then you also add Tyler Scott, get a new running back room, right? Like you added a lot. You get a fucking really nice guard in Nate Davis. You have Tevin Jenkins coming back. You draft Darnell Wright. Like you have a lot of talent on offense, and this offense should go. And we're gonna find out whether it's talent or coaching or whatever right away, in my opinion, because like there's more than enough talent out there to make things happen. It's up to Fields to kind of work with it. Now, I do think we didn't get enough for how much we've invested in terms of wide receivers, but we don't have to go down that road.
So I think Alap kind of brings up a good question, kind of rolling into what we're talking about anyway. What if Fields puts up 3,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and adds 750 and 5 touchdowns rushing, but the Bears are 6 and 11. So I'll go ahead and start and say that I think Justin having time in the pocket is naturally going to make him run less, significantly less. And I think designed runs, while they are still going to be something that we're going to mess around with, I don't think we're going to use it nearly as much as we did last year. I think kind of the philosophy looking back on it was Justin's going to get hit regardless if he goes back to pass or if he runs, so we might as well get positive yards out of it. But I think with how much we really put into the offensive line, and I really think this is a big season for Braxton Jones. Like Braxton Jones, if you want to make your shot here to be a highly paid left tackle and be a long-term starter, this is the year to do it, because if you're not going to be able to cut the mustard, you're a guy that's going to get moved pretty quickly, because the Bears can't really afford to mess around with something like that. That could also play into Darnell Wright potentially moving to left tackle, but I think they're really going to give Braxton a shot at it. But I don't see Justin having that low of passing yards if he has time in the pocket. I think he'll be able to be a little bit more patient. I don't think he's going to have fucking happy feet. I think he's going to be able to look at some of his reads with a little bit more of a clear mindset that he doesn't have somebody chasing him down or that he has to take off. And I think getting to work with a guy like DJ Moore to be able to take off some of the attention off guys like Chase Claypool, Darnell Mooney, potentially whether that's Darnell Scott or Velus Jones, who kind of fits in that other wide receiver spot. That's gonna really help. I think it's very undervalued how much time in the pocket really helps what you're doing as a quarterback. And I think Justin did get some happy feet last year because he got killed in the Matt Nagy era, and he was starting to get killed in the next era because we really didn't address the offensive line as much as we probably should have last year. So it gets to the point as a young quarterback when you're just getting hit every single time, like, of course you're going to be looking over your shoulder, and it's a normal reaction. It's hard to be a quarterback getting hit as much as Justin was getting hit.
That's why I wonder if he just has that faith because they made some moves. Like, is he just going to stick in there, or are those habits formed? And how long?
Well, because at Ohio State, he's stuck in the pocket quite a bit. Like, yes, he could take off and run, but he would just gash people over the middle of the field, down the field. Like, when he's able to set his feet and throw a deep ball in a clean pocket, holy shit! Especially off a play action, like from taking a snap under center, doing a play action, being able to step into a play action, throw down the field. It's dynamite. It's genuinely dynamite, and we didn't get to see enough of that last year. A lot of Justin's deep throws. And I don't want to make excuses for him because some of them were just completely dog shit throws. But there was a lot of plays where he was really pulling that trigger even a little bit too quick before he could fully set his front foot. And that's why you saw a lot of those balls wobble last year. Whereas at Ohio State, if you go back and watch a lot of his film, when he's being able to step up in that pocket and really just plant his foot and deliver a football, it's a beautiful thing to watch. So to answer your question, and then Lucas, I'll let you take over. I think that passing yards is a little too low if we have time in the pocket. And if Justin's going to have that time in the pocket, I think you have to hover a little bit on the higher end of the 20s. I really think the running version of Justin Fields last year has kind of made people forget a little bit of why we drafted him in the first place. And a lot of it had to do with his arm.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything you said there is accurate, but when I was talking about essentially like those habits are formed now because of his situation. So, it's kind of like in the past, I worked out 6 days a week religiously. That was a good habit that I had. That's not the case anymore, right? Like, so how long is it going to take for him to build those habits back, or did they become habits, right? Like, how quick is this going to be? Is this going to be something that we see progress through the year? I don't think he's broken by any means, right? But like, there is going to have to be some undoing of that shit because like his only experience in the NFL, it's 2 years of just having to run for his fucking life. And that's not how it was at Ohio State, right? Like, he took some shots. He had to evade pass rushes and use his legs for sure when he was there. But like you said, he was stepping into his throws. He was planting his feet. He had time to throw. So does he automatically just have that faith? I hope so. I hope he could just flip that switch. But just kind of one of those things that you wonder, is it going to be something that requires a season of patience, 3 games of patience, no patience, right? Like, he should get a feel for it too, even though they're not allowed to touch him in training camp. He should get a feel for how much the defense is able to get after him and stuff like that. So I don't know, man.
It's a polarizing discussion, dude. It's a discussion a lot of people really don't want to have. People are kind of really under the idea like Justin's going to be great regardless, And I think those are the people that are going to be disappointed when Justin has an all right game. You know what I mean? Like, I don't expect Justin to come out week 1 setting the world on fire through the air because of the points you just made. Like, it is an adjustment when you're getting hit that much compared to when, maybe you start getting time. You almost have this, like, and I know it sounds stupid because it's like a good problem to have type thing, but you almost hit this point as a quarterback where it's like, holy fuck, I'm still standing and it's been 3 seconds. You know what I mean? And like, he doesn't quite know how to react because his first instinct after probably 2.5 seconds was to be like, all right, I need to start moving. Otherwise I'm going to get hit. And then once I'm moving, it's like, well, shit, that's open. A first down's open. I might as well just fucking take that instead of throwing it down the field. Whereas, like, I don't necessarily want Justin to pass up those opportunities because I think that's a very smart way to go about it. Is churning in the first downs and you'll eventually get the big play. But he's not going to have to make that first move. You know what I mean? He should be able to stick in the pocket. And if it breaks down after about 3-4 seconds and there's really nothing there, then you maybe catch a lane and you're able to just run forward instead of trying to roll out and buy more time. You know what I mean? The point of like really taking off when you have time in the pocket is being able to commit to just taking off instead of just using it to extend the play. Not necessarily a bad thing, but not necessarily an ideal thing if you have a good offensive line.
I really only want him to take off when the defense's back is turned to him and he can just get those easy yards like Mahomes. You know what I mean? Like, we've talked about it pretty much to nauseum, but just run the ball when you're near the goal line, right? Like, be utilized like Jalen Hurts, where you're not running in between the 20s. We started doing way too much of that. We're not going to talk into fucking offensive strategy. I do think 11, we'll see. We'll see, because now that he has time, he's going to have a lot more attempts, I would assume. He's had dog shit when it comes to attempts. I think if you put both of his seasons together, probably look like what a full season of like an actual star quarterback has in terms of
his average attempts are brutal.
So so with the attempts going up, like at first I was like 11's kind of high because I know he doesn't throw that many and he takes care of the ball. His interceptions are fucking stupid. They're a lot of the time they're like got tipped or hit somebody's hands or something like that, or he makes a very stupid decision and throws the ball directly to Aiden Hutchinson. Like shit.
It's funny because you just read my fucking mind because
they're all dumb. They're all
that's the worst one. But like, quarterbacks are gonna make those fucking throws every once in a while. You know what I mean?
He's not throwing interceptions like trying to fit things into windows that he can't fit into. It's like the ball got away from him in Green Bay and fucking he overthrew, or he didn't see the safety undercutting the route. That was a tough one in Green Bay. But it usually seems like the ball gets away from him. And it's not like, or like he doesn't see someone. It's not like he's like a Brett Favre type, right? Or a gunslinger. Like, he is a lot more careful with the ball than a typical gunslinger, even though he has a gunslinger arm. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree with that.
Should we get into these draft guys now? Because I mean, now that we've had time to simmer on it, I feel like we've covered Justin Fields a lot in general.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just, hey, the only reason I like kind of liked that point, and kind of that point to really talk about it is because like listening to like everybody else, whether it's the Chicago media and all that shit, like as a big Justin Fields fan, like nobody wants to have the conversation that maybe there's still a little bit of growing pains, that's going to move forward. There's a lot of moving pieces. I always think of the Dream Team Eagles, and I know that's a terrible example, but like I always just think of new guys being just rushed into a building and thinking, oh, these guys are great on fucking paper. They should all gel. It just doesn't always work that way. Like it's going to take a second for DJ Moore and Justin Fields to get it going. That's not going to be a day one thing. He's still probably going to go to Darnell Mooney more than DJ to start. But anyway, we'll just moving into the next point. So obviously, Darnell Wright was a guy we both loved. I can go up here and say that I can eat crow about the Jalen Carter situation because I thought there was zero chance we would pass on him if he was available. I was wrong. I can own that. Do I think it was the right move? When you get Darnell Wright, I don't have to answer that question because Darnell Wright was the guy at tackle that I wanted it. Well, at offensive tackle that I wanted. And that Lucas Perfetti wanted. So it's very hard to be upset with that. We did not try to reach at a hometown boy. We did not try to draft a guy that is probably going to bode well better as a guard. We drafted a guy who did not give up a sack in the SEC last year. You know what I mean? Like we drafted a legitimate stud, and I mean, Lucas, you're more than welcome to give your thoughts on it, but I feel like Darnell Wright, like, kind of speaks for itself, man. This is a guy that we hyped up all throughout the draft process. He's a guy that we wanted. And now that we got him, it just feels pretty damn good.
Because I felt Darnell Wright was the most can't miss, right? Like Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, those were guys that like supposedly have higher ceilings and they're more athletic looking and blah, 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 blah. The modern day fucking tackle. No, like he's a throwback big boy. You can't see his gut right now. Maybe we should take our faces off the screen for a hot second. But in this picture, like he's a typical O lineman, right? And he's just as athletic as some of these, like a Paris Johnson. I think he's even got a better RAS score than Paris Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. It was him or Broderick Jones. One of them, he was like third overall in general. Not that RAS is that big of a deal, but the guy's athletic. And it's tough to really look past that type of production. Just to highlight the trade again, like who knows? We'll know in 4 years who got the better end of the deal. If the Bears really saw Carter as a liability or dispensable, whatever it may be, like, and he doesn't work out, and they end up with Wright getting the extra fourth rounder is going to be like, oh, that was a genius move. Right now, it's tough to say that was enough for. I don't care who. Like what the leverage was or anything like that, like a future fourth from a team that's competing for a Super Bowl. So it's pretty much a fifth. That's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow to be passing up. And I think the general consensus with that, with like most fans is, if you're looking at it objectively, it's true. It doesn't even match up on the chart. You're talking about in the top 10. Top 10, you should usually have to pay more in order to get up somewhere. I do understand the aspect of like, hey, if Poles thought he can go down to 14 or 15, whatever, with the Jets or something like that, because they wanted to trade up. But he was afraid that Wright wasn't going to be there. So that's why he was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll just take what I can get. I do understand that aspect of things if they really had Darnell Wright as their number one, but it's tough to believe that. It's tough to believe that the off the field stuff with Jalen Carter didn't get involved, which, that is part of the process. Like you are as a GM, you have to mitigate risk and manage risk as much as possible and try to put the best product out there. So we'll see. Overall, in general, though, I think the draft was great. The only thing, and I saw this reference, and I don't know who to give credit to, but someone said, I'm at least phrasing it a lot nicer. Is it possible that Jervon Dexter was this year's Velus Jones? And not in a sense of like, he's a bust already or he's going to drop punts, right? But in a sense of consensus big boards had him ranked a lot lower than what he was actually drafted. And like the Bears were very similar to the Velus Jones reaction. Inside the war room, they were fucking pumped to get Dexter. So I just wonder if it's like, is it that big reach for them where they were like, but it just doesn't make sense because it was at 53. Who knows? Maybe they caught wind of something and they found out he wasn't going to make it past a certain point. There's things about Dexter, if we want to get deeper into it, that I really like, and things that I think were coached that were bad habits that need to be fixed. But that's
I mean, honestly, Gervin Dexter, that's kind of where I want to get to here, because I do kind of have a pretty strong opinion about it. This is a guy that you look at him and you just think bigger, faster, stronger than whoever he's lined up against. Guy's got the speed. He was put in a position at Florida where they did not have the talent up front for really anyone to slide into that position other than really the best defensive lineman they had. Jervin was really playing in a situation where he wasn't able to just kind of bullnose through a defender, try to rush the passer every single down or on later downs. It was a lot of him kind of coming up to the center, kind of holding that spot and trying to either plug that or try to shoot to a gap once he knows where the ball is going to go and run defense. And I don't think that really bodes well into what he does. I think you look at him as a natural athlete. You look at his film, and I hate to do even going back to high school type film, but he's a guy who just, when he's allowed to just kind of shoot off the ball, instead of kind of having that type of matchup where he was really asked to kind of do that a lot at Florida, this guy can be a dynamite pick. Like, I genuinely really believe that. And I know the reason why he wasn't higher, I think you brought up coaching, and I think that has a lot to do with it, was, you see a lot of guys throughout the draft process, Noah Sewell, one we talked about before the show, even guys who kind of fall into a scheme that doesn't totally fit their set, makes their draft stock really hit it. You know what I mean? Because guys kind of teams want to draft somebody who already knows how to play the system that they're drafting to go into. You know what I mean? That's how you get your first rounders. Rarely are you going to see a team draft a first round type talent that doesn't fit their scheme. And if they do, they usually get beat over the head for it. You know what I mean? And when you have a situation with Dexter, that's just not a guy in the NFL that you would want to play the position that he was playing, because genuinely he's going to get washed up from better centers or better guards. You know what I mean? But if he's a guy who can just genuinely shoot a gap and not have a responsibility about an offensive lineman that he has to essentially block on defense, which is a very real thing in a lot of defensive schemes, especially in the 3-4, when you look at what a nose tackle does. I think you really have a chance of getting a dynamite prospect here. And I think that's what a guy like Matt Eberflus sees. I think Matt Eberflus sees Dexter as somebody that he can mold into what he wants from a 3-technique defensive tackle. And, this guy, when given the green light to do a pass rush between gaps and really just kind of swim move his way through a guard in the center or even a guard and a tackle, I think he can be a dynamite pick. Now, is he going to be that day one? Is it going to be a little bit of process? Potentially. But, I think that Velus Jones comparison, I think that's a little unfair, because I think he's a guy who desperately needed to be in a system that fit his scheme. And unfortunately, he was in a scheme that just desperately needed him because of how talented he was. And hopefully that translates to the NFL with a defensive mind like Eberflus that can put him in a position to succeed that'll probably better fit his assets, because in the NFL, it's all about playing the position at the absolute best you can. You're not supposed to just be some guy playing across the line. And if you are, it's a good chance your defense is either dog shit or your team is dog shit, because you shouldn't have to ask that type of thing unless it's like an Aaron Donald. But again, rare case.
Yeah. You kind of took a lot of what I was going to say, but the one thing, I mean, first, he's an enormous man. He's like 6'7" or some shit. 320 pounds or something crazy like that. I might be exaggerating a little.
He kind of got that like Eric Armstead build to him.
He's big as fuck. That's the first thing. And like you said, he's pretty fast, at least straight line speed for his size. But the thing and this is what I wonder if Poles and Eberflus saw. He was told by his coaches to mirror the center. That's kind of what you were getting at. Those were the exact words, to mirror the center. But the one thing that's strange to me is like, he still wasn't firing off the ball. And that's the one thing that everyone has brought up on Twitter and kind of has noticed. It's like, is he slow off the snap or what's his deal? It's like, no, a big part of why he was doing that is because he was mirroring the center. But like, even as a coach, like, you shouldn't teach this kid bad habits just because he's bigger than everyone else. You know what I mean? Like, and he can come off the ball slow. Like, you have to fire off the ball in order to do that. You could still get into someone's chest and mirror their center by essentially feeling where they're trying to take you and fighting that resistance, right? Like, he just was almost like standing straight up. So I feel like it is something that is extremely correctable and something that can be corrected pretty quickly, right? Like, you get him in rookie minicamp and all these OTAs and shit and just like put a ball in front of him and have him fucking fire off into the sled. Like, that's going to fix, like, that's a very fixable issue, right? Now, some of the other stuff there, like, how much does that affect? What does that do to his ceiling? I don't know, but he is a very intriguing prospect. It was, not that consensus big boards matter at fucking all, but he was, I think, 103 overall on the consensus big board. So it was quite a reach in terms of that. But yeah, no, I'm not gonna, and that's why I tried to phrase it delicately. Like, I think they meant it in a sense of like an overdraft of where he should have gone versus where he went and how excited we were about it. But either way, very interesting prospect. And then we had a trade up for Stevenson, which I mock drafted Stevenson 100 times, and he's a perfect cover 2 corner. I like him a lot. But that trade up there felt like we were going after JMS. It just seemed too like we are completing the offense now. Like, we're getting a young center to go along with it that could run the calls, that can get to the second level. A guy that arguably could have went first in his class, but Tippmann, your boy, Mullet Man, went first. So it's like I was a little surprised by it because it felt like that was the first move to me that it was like BPA. Like, they must have had him rated pretty high. And that's one of the ones on the consensus big board where they actually made out pretty well, right? He was like the 43rd overall prospect. They got him at 56. So there was even that video that came out with the Giants of how they were really worried because Jalen Hyatt and JMS were the 2 guys that they wanted, and the Bears jumped the Giants, and they were all like, fuck, they're taking one of the 2, right? Because we need a receiver. We could have used an extra receiver. We also needed a center. So, excuse me. But it was pretty shocking, but I can't say I disliked the pick. I just thought when that happened, I thought it was JMS.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I agree with you in the sense of like where Tyreek Stevenson was ranked compared to where he was drafted, because, while obviously if you go back on our live stream, you'll see us talking really every pick after the Dexter pick. It's like, okay, this is a center. Okay, this one's a center. Okay, this one's a center. I swear to God, we had to have done it about four fucking times. But even with that, when we were talking, like I know I brought it up a couple times, like, how is Tyreek Stevenson still on the board? I didn't think we were going to get him. Like, I really didn't think we were going to draft corner that early. I thought that was something we were possibly going to take a chance at, like high upside guys later in the rounds, because we had more pressing needs than corner, especially with how much we spent on the secondary in the last year. But God, but he was easily the best player on the board when we drafted him. Like, I thought it was a dynamite pick. That was being able to set aside need and really just go and load up at a position for a guy who you really think can be a long-term starter in the NFL. And dude, I think Tyreek Stevens can be that. I thought he should have went in the mid-second round. He's a guy who really shouldn't have been sitting on the board at 56. He's a guy who can play inside, outside. He's physical. He's fast. He can do a little bit of everything. He's a very, very coachable player. He's a very, kind of a gadget, plug and play type guy. Whether or not he plays outside or they move Kyler outside permanently and Tyreek plays the slot, I don't really think you can go wrong in that situation, because I think those are 2 guys that can both play multiple positions. And you really kind of start seeing it with both Poles and Eberflus with the guys that they draft in the secondary, guys who can really plug and play anywhere. I mean, even with the Jaquan Brisker pick, a guy who can play, sub linebacker and free safety, and even go down and play the slot in a bigger set. You know what I mean? If we wanted a third safety on the field, there's a lot of different ways we can mess around with that. And that's the type of versatility you like to have. This isn't like the defensive tackle moving an offensive line versatility. You know what I mean? This is the actual, this guy can legitimately play more than one position versatility. And that's why I really like that pick. It wasn't who I thought we were going to pick, but I remember being enamored that Stevenson was falling. And I think him falling into our laps and him being drafted by Devin Hester after Devin Hester having to walk up on that podium and draft a Florida player and then getting to draft a Miami player was fantastic.
Yeah. We'll see. I think outside of Darnell Wright, he's probably going to be the one that's like a day one starter. If I had to guess, right? I don't know. Vildor actually Vildor has his peaks and valleys, but I feel like he left us on a good note. Before injury or before.
I will say I like him a lot better as being that first guy off the bench compared to being a guy that I have to see 99 to 100% of the snaps. You know what I mean? I've been someone who's been super hard on Kindle Vildor. I think I'm pretty justified in a lot of it, but you're right. He did show some spots last year where he didn't look like liability. He actually was in the right place at the right time. Seems like a guy who picked up Eberflus's system, maybe a little bit slower than others, but once he really had it, he really started to lock it down. But that's depth, man. Those are guys that, yes, they'll start in a season where we end up playing for the first overall pick, but they still bode really well as a depth piece once we get more talented players on the field. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of guys churn out really nice careers by being that first guy off the bench for their position. And when they're asked to go in there and play, they don't miss a beat because they've studied more than anybody because they've had the opportunity to.
And that experience helps a lot, right? Like you want a backup that's started some games. You don't want him to be a fresh rookie that you're just finding out about
or an Artie Burns that we're just taking a shot on, who's a former first over.
I had hope for Artie Burns, though.
I did not, but it's very, very well documented. I saw a lot of them at Pittsburgh, and holy fuck. Obviously Zach Pickens, another guy. We really went for the athletic interior defensive lineman, and I like that.
I think athleticism was just a requirement this year for polls, to be honest.
Yeah, and with Pickens, he's got a little bit of that project to him too. Good football player, good motor. Obviously, the physicality and the athleticism is there, and his ability. Like he went from 305 to 291 at the combine. Like he can lose weight and he can gain it back. Like he's a guy that can kind of play whatever type of position you need him to play. Is he the most, poised pass rusher in the world as far as using his hands to get to the quarterback? Probably not. More of a kind of a brute type of idea. Maybe you want to see him shoot a gap a little bit more, maybe develop a swim move. But a guy that, it's a nice pick in the fourth round. I think he's a guy that a lot of teams are really high on. I think they're willing to see how far he was going to drop.
Yeah. Pickens was our third, just to make sure. But I like Pickens a lot, actually. Here's the thing. If you take a step back now, we went through the first four picks. It's a meat and potatoes draft. We drafted a corner, a tackle, 2 fucking defensive tackles. Like that is like something we've been kind of begging for. Get us some high draft capital, not like throwing shit at a wall with using your 3 5th rounders on one guy, hoping one pans out, which I don't hate that strategy. And I always have optimism for it. But this is the first time in a long time that I feel like we've invested all of our major capital on like trenches or corner, which is also a very, important position, a necessity in this NFL. So I just feel like applaud polls for that, right? Like we really needed some cornerstone pieces and some guys and if these guys do materialize, we have some really nice pieces on the D line and O line that are young, fresh. Like I do like the direction that it's going. You just have to see it on the field now, right? Like I do think even Pickens might have been a little bit of an overdraft as well, but I was intrigued with him as a prospect. I thought he was good. I thought he fit our system really well. And I think Eberflus is going to be able to, he's pretty well known for getting the most out of DTs and linebackers. So,
yeah, I think the versatility is really where it probably stuck. Obviously I just went off on the tangent with versatility about Tyreek Stevenson, and then, Pickens, he's a guy who can play, both tackle positions as well. You know what I mean?
I think they both can. Yeah, both tackles. I think you can switch in and out. Like they might play one more than the other, but I think they both are capable of playing both positions.
And I think size plays into that, and then you have the natural athleticism behind it. Like it's a nice potential high upside pick, and I think Dexter might have a little bit more of the upside, but I think really both guys, like you have the potential to kind of really mess around with that and keep fresh bodies on the field, as we kind of said earlier in the podcast. Speaking of fresh bodies, Rashawn Johnson, my guy from Texas, actually came in as a quarterback. And kind of had to convert because of the quarterback room getting a little little crowded in Texas, with all those top prospects. I'm not bragging or anything, but I really think what really sets him apart as far as a second string running back per se, because obviously, Bijan Robinson was like the guy, but I think very low mileage, guy who breaks a lot of tackles. And when you can keep him fresh, man, he's got a good burst to him. He's a big boy, 6 foot, 219, 220. Even if you put on another 5 pounds, like that's somebody like you get him between the tackles. That's something we can really mess around with. I think it's nice having him and Devonta Foreman, two big old Texas boys, to be able to kind of keep fresh running backs on the field. And feel how you want about a guy like Khalil Herbert, but this is having this much depth at running back now. Not necessarily to say that we've perfectly replaced David Montgomery or anything, because it's far too early to say anything like that. But this just keeps the availability of fresh legs on the field in the backfield, and that's just when you have a fresh runner, like you're already kind of at an advantage because they get the running start at the line of scrimmage. You know what I mean? You're not going to have that one workhorse guy and just kind of work him into the ground. Rashawn Johnson, with how little he had to actually run the football at Texas, you can get a nice little career out of him, So I really like the pick.
I do get the vibe of like a Josh Jacobs from him. Maybe not as,
not as polished, but yeah,
not as polished, and he's not going to have as high of an upside, right? Like Jacobs is a lot faster, more athletic, and stuff like that. Yeah. It's funny because I think Rashawn Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, he ran a 4.63 and David Montgomery ran a 4.64 or something like that. So like he really doesn't have that long speed. I think Foreman does, if I'm not mistaken. I think he ran like a 4.4 something. I think he's pretty fast actually. But
he's nice between the tackles for sure. I think he's beefed up a little bit since he's been in the NFL, but keep going.
And they even said like, Rashawn Johnson is I don't know where I was going with that. Either way, Rashawn Johnson, one thing that I really like that he does, I had it and then I lost it. A lot of people are kind of like making him that number one overall guy right now. And I do see him being more of a spell guy, right? Like that power guy, but it also kind of shows what the Bears want. Like this is the first true power back we've seen them draft. And it is kind of, he gives me Jordan Howard vibes, to be honest. Like not the Khalil Herbert run one quick cut, because it's like, he's not moving that fast, but he has enough burst. Like he's moving, and then guys just fall off of him. Like he's just a very strong runner, has really good contact balance, I guess would be the buzzword for that. But overall, it's like guys just kind of roll off of him. But I get that. That's what I was getting at. I get the Josh Jacobs vibe is like in a sense of he played predominantly a backup role. Not a lot of mileage, right? Like it was kind of a risk because he didn't start Josh Jacobs. And everyone kind of criticized, that's why he fell as far as he did. Because in terms of a prospect, he was really good, but their production wasn't there to show it. So maybe that's part of the reason why Rashawn Johnson fell. Another thing, dude, Texas used him a lot in like wildcat read options. He was a quarterback. Getsy better play with that shit. Like that is really appealing. The fact that he can come in and run that wildcat, because Dave Montgomery was running that wildcat for us last year, right? Like you can get really creative with him, and the fact that he can throw the ball, like you can fucking catch teams off guard. You have an emergency quarterback. I like him. A big part of, I think, what people admired him for is the fact that he stayed at Texas. Like he could have transferred somewhere and started. He was good enough to start in college football. Let's be real here, right? But he stayed there because that was his squad, and he wanted to. He didn't mind backing up Bijan. Like similar kind of feel to Hurts, right? Like he backed up, supported him, eventually transferred, but just kind of that, hey, I'm okay in my role. Like I'm not too big. I'm not bigger than the team type thing. So there's a lot of pluses with Rashawn Johnson. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't super high on him coming in. I'm starting to see things I like with him more, but what I envision for like what is happening in the modern NFL, I just kind of envision something a little bit different for where the Bears were going, right? Like looking at a little bit more of what the Packers like to do, the Niners, right? Like they have Elijah Mitchell to run inside, and that's probably the Rashawn Johnson role. But I thought he ran better outside, to be honest, at Texas. Like I get very strong. People don't want to say it, but I get very strong Jordan Howard vibes from him. I had someone disagreeing with me on Twitter about it.
We'll see. And, I think people get kind of lost in the idea that if you don't have long speed, which he definitely doesn't, that you can't cut outside. And I think Jordan Howard's a good example because he was a guy that used to do that. Matt Nagy loved beating him to death between the guards and tackles, but Jordan Howard on a power outside the right tackle's ass was a beautiful fucking play to watch, man. Because he could always just go out there and it didn't matter who was in front of him. He just had the full intention to just run right through him. And that's a lot easier to do than running through a fucking 330-pound down lineman. Like, Matt Nagy used to like.
And like a power set, like being super fast isn't necessarily the best advantage, right? Like, unless you're running like a wide zone or a stretch type concept, right? But like in that power off tackle, as you were describing, it's kind of better to not be that fast because you got to let your guy set up and let your offensive lineman get there. So you're still running at full speed. It's like he's not slowing up, but he's just kind of naturally going with the play. And that's that's the vibe I get from Roschon.
Well, and I really think, I know you talked about like us almost going away from the trend in the NFL, but I think it's almost us getting with the trend a little bit when you look at offenses like, say, a Kyle Shanahan offense that really just prioritizes having fresh legs in the backfield. I don't think it's kind of similar to, Andy Reid always being able to find a quarterback regardless of who the fuck it is. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't matter who you toss in there. Kyle Shanahan's pretty good doing that with running backs, and that's because he has an understanding and a system that none of those guys are the featured back. Even a Christian McCaffrey, he's not on the field every single snap. He's obviously a little bit more on there after what they gave him for the trade. But when you look historically, it's keeping fresh legs on the field, and that makes everybody better. And I think when you can do that, when you have three running backs who you really end up trusting with the football, who, Devonta Foreman had a pretty good year last year. Khalil Herbert led the NFL in rushing, yards per carry. And then you have a guy like Roschon Johnson, who was kind of a Swiss Army knife out of the backfield. I'm interested to see what we do in like a spread, how much we utilize the spread and being able to have a guy like Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson on the field at the same time, or even a Devonta Foreman and Roschon Johnson at the same time, in a red zone situation. That's kind of an exciting thought, especially when you think of what Justin Fields can do as a runner as well. So, and I think you highlight on a good point. Getsy, this is a big season for him as well, because it was very up and down, a lot of peaks and valleys last year. We love that term on this podcast, but he needs to get creative, and I think Roschon Johnson's another example of a guy that he has on the field to get creative with.
You can do a lot with him. That's what I like. I feel like you can do a lot with him. I think it also begs the question, which running back gets cut? I don't think does one get cut? I think one has to get cut because the way they talked about Roschon Johnson, they thought he should have been drafted much sooner and he should have never made it to day 3, right? So it begs the idea they're not going to put him on practice squad. You have a fullback, you paid 2 running backs, and you have Herbert. Like, you can't have a 53-man roster, only have 46 active, right? And I guess you can keep him on the 53 and just not have one of the running backs be active each week.
It's like, Lucas, it's the elephant in the room. We need to discuss who's obviously getting cut.
I don't know if it's Travis Homer, dude.
Dude, it has to be Travis Homer. You can't justify I hate sitting here.
He got signed for a purpose, and that was the fucking pass block. It's not for any other reason.
Yeah, but we're not going to just sit here and cut Khalil Herbert. That's like we signed 2 guys and we drafted one.
Foreman is kind of the odd man out, to be honest.
Oh, but I mean, dude, Foreman, 4.5 yard average last year. You know what I mean?
I get it. Hey, I'm just saying it's not a terrible problem to have having too many good running backs, right? But it's just there is I don't know if my gut tells me, yeah, it should be Travis Homer, but something in my head is saying maybe it's not. Maybe
is Travis Homer a guy that can hit practice squad that no other team will touch? Maybe. You know what I mean? I feel like if anybody's a practice squad candidate, it would be him. You know what I mean?
I feel like it seems like the easy choice is the odd man out. That's all I'm saying. He seems like the easy choice is the odd man out. And it does seem, even as someone who does not like Khalil Herbert that much, right? I don't dislike him, but the reality is, like, I think people are talking about him like he's fucking Walter Payton, and it's a little insane.
I get the opposite vibe, man. I think people aren't talking about him enough, but continue.
Dude, either way, I just feel like he's the only one that's not fitting a specific type. Like, they wanted bruiser types. Khalil Herbert is not a bruiser. Like, he's more of a finesse player, right? So it's just, I don't know, man. But that's what I'm getting at. Even as someone who's not super high on Khalil Herbert, like, cutting him would be insane. You'd have to trade him, right? But even still, like, him being the odd man out, like, after averaging 6.4 yards a carry, then it just seems like Poles is on a mission to only have his type of guys and the guys that he brought in, right? Like, it'd be almost
nuts. It'd be so nuts. That would genuinely blow me away. I guess I can't like completely close my mind to a trade because obviously, you know, we've seen the Bears trade, you know, quality running backs in the past, kind of out of the blue. You know, Jordan Howard, Thomas Jones kind of come to mind, but I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. I think I don't think he was going to be there. And I don't think the Bears really planned to draft a running back that high. And I think when they saw him sitting there, it was kind of the situation with Stevenson, where like, I don't think the Bears really planned on drafting a corner in that situation, unless a guy like that fell. And the more they saw him fall, I think the more they kind of fell in love with the idea where it's like, all right, well, you know, let's kind of load up here. And then, you know, I would just say Foreman and Homer just can't afford to have bad camps. I guess would be those. I feel like those two are going to be kind of the battle. You know
I think you can get out of both their contracts pretty easily. Like, you got to pay him like $1 million to have signed with you for a month. But
yeah, well, I don't think a Foreman's a guy you can stash in on the practice squad. That's why I feel like Homer is kind of the more obvious candidate. I mean, but you're right. You know, we've seen crazier shit. We've seen coaches fall in love with players like that. But kind of continue to move down the list. You know, Tyler Scott, I think a lot of people are really high on this pick. I
temper my expectations.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, Tyler, you know, runs a 4.40. That's great. Definitely a guy that maybe slid a little bit, but I thought pretty much where he was drafted was pretty par for the course of where I thought he was going to go. He's definitely can get down the field, pretty good route runner. Obviously kind of got that physical type of tag to him, but you know, there's not a ton of polish there. And I think, you know, for people who want to shit on a guy like Velus Jones, Velus was kind of in the same boat as far as
I think he's
and like not a lot of polish. So like people, you know, like you said, I think people need to temper their expectations a little bit because people are going nuts about Tyler Scott right now. And you know, unless he just kind of sets the world on fire, I think it's going to be kind of a slow build with him.
Here's my thing with him. I say temper. Like, I really like the pick because it seems like a perfect match for Fields. I think there's a stat out there, either 20+ yard or 40+ yard touchdowns that he had on the season. It was like over half of his touchdowns. I think he led the college, the NCAA and those types of touchdowns, right? I forget which one it was, but really explosive plays. We're talking about huge plays that go for touchdowns. And if you look at how Fields throws the ball and how Tyler Scott is able to track the ball, I see it being a really good fit. But I do see him really only being that like wide receiver 4. Maybe he works his way up to wide receiver 3 if he can do a little bit more in terms of route running in the future. But I see him really being that guy that's just going to take the top off the defense. And you always have to pay attention to him because if you let him go free, Fields is going to throw him something that he's going to run under and he'll catch like, dude, I could see him catching like 25 balls on the year and having like 6 touchdowns, right? Like, I could see it being like that type of guy where he's just your big play. I'm fighting for a player example of someone that like had that kind of production where like they didn't have a lot of catches, but when they caught it, it went for fucking, you know, they went for bombs. Like a
kind of like a Dante Stallworth.
Almost, yeah. Like that's kind of, you know what I mean? Like just someone that like he is a true take the top off the defense type of guy. And he's someone that you have to account for if he's on the field, and you have to have someone run deep with him, and you can have shit run underneath it, right? Like I could see him being used as a chess piece, and I think he's a very good chess piece because he fits our quarterback skill set really well. But other than that, like I don't see him being a guy that should be targeting in your fucking dynasty fantasy drafts. And I'll have decent optimism for him, but like, and I like the pick, especially in the 4th round. Like those are 2 guys that, you look at the first 4 picks, it's all guys that are trenches, cornerstone type pieces. Then you get your toys in the 4th round with your 2 picks where you're like, we think these guys should have been drafted way higher. Like we're gonna, you know what I mean? Now we have our flashy like pieces, and then they get back into the trenches and some cornerbacks, right? Like so, in that sense, I do like it how it went, right? Like the strategy of it.
Yeah, no, and I think just kind of my final point on Tyler Scott would be potential insurance moving into next year if a guy like Chase Claypool doesn't end up working out. And kind of depending on what happens with the Darnell Mooney situation, you're going to want some experienced young guys in the door that at least are going to know the offense heading into next year if there is kind of that competition for that 3rd wide receiver spot. And I think that kind of puts you in an interesting position with a guy like Tyler Scott, as well as seeing what a guy like Velus can do, because I don't think the Bears are totally out on Velus Jones quite yet. I think these 2nd-year leaps happen a lot more often than people give credit for, and physically he can do it. But I think this is going to be, I think Poles was looking ahead a little bit on this one. It's like, okay, this is a high upside guy. He's, he was an Olympic sprinter, a junior Olympic sprinter, but same thing. A guy who can obviously move, a guy that bodes into, like you said, Justin Fields' skill set. But maybe just a guy that you almost want to put on the back burner. You don't want to rush him onto the field too soon because, he's a guy you kind of want to learn the NFL system. Maybe you play him on special teams so he's still, staying fresh, getting licked and whatnot, because you're obviously going to need that as a rookie in the NFL to kind of get an idea of the physicality you're going to be dealing with. But, somebody just kind of toss in the back burner, and then you go into next year feeling really good about Tyler Scott after he has a good training camp. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I mean, the Velus shit is overblown at this point. Like if you were to take away Velus Jones's punt returns, like if you never put him back there in punt return, you would be pretty optimistic, right? You'd be like, okay, he didn't produce that much, but like turned it up towards the end of the season. We started seeing him being utilized a little bit more, like saw his big playability with a couple bombs, right? Like it's like, okay, we're starting to see it a little bit. It's the punt, if it's the fumbles on the punt returns that has really stained his image in the fans' eyes.
Yeah, I mean, and me and you saw a horrible one in person.
Awful,
so like, I mean, we have all the reason to dislike Velus Jones for shit like that, but
should have never been back there in the first place. We should talk to the coaching staff on that too, right? Like and he showed it as a kick returner for sure. Like that's real. His ability to return kicks is real. So people are talking about him like he's going to be fucking cut almost in favor of Tyler Scott. Like that's why I feel like it has to be a running back. But yeah, no, I just feel like you don't move on from a 3rd round pick that quickly and give him no opportunities, right? Like you put him in a role that you think he can do well and see how he takes to that and then add to that if there's more to it, right? But he's an interesting piece as well. Like they do have some interesting pieces in terms of depth, and now we have some pretty quality wide receivers. So
well, and I think you have to look at how many wide receivers we carried last year, and you have to look at the fact that our offensive coordinator kind of got into this position by being a wide receiver coach for years. So, I mean, wide receivers are kind of a high priority in the Chicago Bears offense. So I would be stunned to see a guy like Velus get cut, especially the fact that he did give us some production. And there were guys who gave us far less, made mistakes, and weren't the draft capital that we gave them. And they all didn't run a 4.3 40. So, like, there's levels, you know what I mean? Like, yes, you can be upset with somebody, but you kind of have to understand, well, it's not impossible, probably not going to happen. Now, last guy I really want to talk about from this draft, obviously the rest of it, Terrell Smith from Minnesota, kind of just taking a shot on a guy that we probably liked, probably interviewed well. Travis Bell from Kennesaw State, the first player ever drafted from Kennesaw State. So take that as you will.
Ryan Poles loves him. He spoke about him so glowingly. I can't say that I dove into the Kennesaw State fucking tape, but we'll see.
His tackle, he's a very much tackle for loss guy. He's a guy who can cause disruption in the backfield. It's all about whether you can do that on an NFL level against NFL caliber offensive line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then Kendall Williamson looks the part of a pretty good safety. We need safety depth badly. Is he a guy that's going to make the roster? We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up taking a flyer on a more experienced type of safety on the cheaper end of things, potentially going into training camp to see if we can get a little bit of a battle. Maybe somebody kind of rises to the top of a situation like that. But me and you had a long discussion about this guy beforehand. And I feel like we kind of honed in our thoughts on it a little bit better. But Noah Sewell at 148 in the 5th round, this is a guy who, as a pretty big college football fan myself, you see this guy on like every preseason Butkus watch list. And those are the guys, well, obviously if he's, not winning it, people aren't going to think too much of it, but this guy was a semifinalist. I believe he was a 2-time semifinalist. That shows that throughout the course of the year, not only did he have hype, but he delivered on a lot of that hype. The only thing with Noah Sewell is being able to kind of find where he can be utilized in Chicago, because with the depth we have at linebacker, off-ball linebacker, and it's a term I absolutely fucking hate because of how much it's changed what it actually means, but as an off-ball linebacker, we kind of got a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now. But Ryan Poles kind of knocked it out of the park with the Jack Sanborn pickup last year, that this Sewell pick could end up being kind of one of those low-key type pickups. Is he does he have an opportunity to get day one, play? Probably not, but there is a lot of upside there. I've seen a lot of people kind of mock Sewell as playing on the edge, and kind of that being his maybe long-term role. To be totally honest with everybody, I don't necessarily see it that way. I think he's a guy who's far better honed in say a 3-4 defense, or potentially even a 4-4 type defense, where he's able to go off the very edge of a tackle compared to actually having to kind of square up, at least have to take a half shed off one of the shoulder pads with a tackle. I genuinely don't think he can get through blocks on the outside. I think he's a guy who's going to need a little bit more of a free release, get a running start to an offensive lineman, and maybe it's a little bit of a different story. But I think people are kind of convincing themselves that this guy is going to be a day one edge rusher. And while the upside is certainly there, I just think that with a hand in the dirt, I think he gets absolutely killed. And I think being able to find a creative way to use him, whether that's in a 4-4 type package, whether that's even messing around with like a 4-6 type package, because 4-3 defenses kind of do mess around with that every once in a blue moon. I believe I saw Eberflus run it maybe 2% of the time last year in goal line sets, but it's all about finding a way to get him involved. I think of, and this isn't a defense I want us to run at all, but I think of when the Packers used to run a psycho type defense, and when you had multiple blitzing linebackers from both the inside and the outside, and you didn't quite know who was always going to blitz. That's more where he bodes well. But who knows? He could completely prove me wrong. Maybe he puts on 10, 15 pounds and becomes a legitimate edge rusher in the NFL. But I just do not think he's a guy who will be able to handle that type of initial contact from an offensive lineman. I think he gets washed in run. He would get washed in run coverage quite a bit. And I think getting him into space is going to be the best possible scenario for Noah Sewell.
Yeah.
For record, me and Lucas talked about this a lot before.
Yeah, dude, we talked about it for like a half an hour, and here's the thing, man. So he was really banged up his senior year, and I believe that they changed defenses or something like that, or put him in a different position. So there was a bit of a drop off his last year. Before that, I think he was a consensus second rounder at the latest, right? Like he was one of those guys that, because he's not a premium position, he's probably not going to go in the first, but he's a very intriguing prospect. And then he warranted a 30-minute conversation pre show, right? Because I do think like he's the type of guy that when you give him opportunities, like you're not going to want him in coverage, right? But like Sam linebackers really aren't on the field that much, but I can see him playing really well in that role. I have a feeling he's going to be one of those guys that just gets opportunities and makes a play, makes another play, gets more opportunities, keeps making plays. And he's eventually someone that you could see the Bears carving out a role for, like a legitimate role, right? It's going to be tough for them to do that just because they're intrigued because he's a 5th-round pick. They're not going to move mountains for this guy. But he just seems like the type of dude to fuck shit up. That's what he seems like, right? Like he seems like the type of dude where if you give him a little bit of steam, a head of steam, and have him run into a tight end or, run into a slot receiver, something like that, it is going to blow up everything that they're trying to do. And it's going to either get someone else free to make a play or he's going to make a play in the backfield like you saw him do in college a lot. He's big as fuck and he's athletic. But he's like it's weird because he's like pretty much a liability in pass coverage. I just feel like he's such a tough person to gauge, but him being there, like he had no business being there in the 5th round. He's way too intriguing of a prospect and just off his fucking brother's success, right? Like you would think, okay, this guy came in and dominated. Like his brother showed some of that in college before he had a really fucked up last year.
Penny Sewell is a different fucking animal.
I get it, but dude, like
monster.
It's just
there's some in the genetics there, but go ahead.
Exactly. Like they are brothers still, right? Like, and he did, like you said, he was a runner-up for the Buckus Award. Like he wasn't a schlub in college. He wasn't some guy that rotated in. Like he fucking dominated for a while. And I know tackle stats don't matter to 70% of the fan base, but he racked up a lot of fucking tackles in college. And it's like almost like Sanborn. Like it's hard to really position him in the modern. I think Sanborn's a better transition into Mike linebacker, but like you're kind of like just really intrigued by his talent, right? You're like, okay, and that's why I think a lot of people associate him with going to defensive end because he had a little bit of pass rush production, but also just his size, his physicality. He plays reckless, right? Like you could just see him putting on 15 pounds, being 260. That's a good 4-3 edge, right? Like he can come off the edge that way. But I kind of understand where you're coming from with he's not built for that, right? Like he played linebacker his whole life. It's just a unique situation that I feel like if he takes advantages of his opportunities, they can carve out sets, packages, and things like that in a legitimate role for him.
Yeah, no, and like probably the biggest thing I like about him is like he kind of has this like instinctual thought of when to take off from the linebacker position. And I think that would almost be tarnished a little bit from playing at the point of attack because that's like really my only critique of him is just from the point of attack. You know what I mean? Because when he can get a just full head of steam running into the backfield, like good luck putting that guy in his ass. You know what I mean? He is going to wreak havoc, kind of similar to what you were talking about. The athleticism and the size is all there. Like it all lines up. And like the idea of knowing when to take off, going on a delayed blitz, kind of understanding that, a tight end sitting in instead of having to brush on a tight end in pass coverage and being able to just kind of take off and kind of try to edge out a mobile quarterback. Because if you look back, a lot of Sewell's pass rushing ability in college and his sacks, a lot of it was him coming out from the outside linebacker position, whether that's, in a technical term, a Sam type of position. I really think that's where he's at his best. I think getting him in space is the absolute best scenario. And like, I know I've already said that quite a bit, but I do think, he is a physical specimen. He can put on weight, and who knows, maybe he is far better at the point of attack than I'm giving him credit for. Totally possible. I've been wrong before. I will be wrong again. But I just see him as a guy that can wreak havoc, as somebody that you put on a delayed blitz from the Sam position and just allow to wreak havoc, man. Let him get a full head of steam and run at somebody. I'm feeling a lot more confident than him taking on somebody at the point of attack right off the snap, if you kind of catch what I mean.
I hope that it comes out kind of quick too. I'm sure it will eventually, but I hope a reporter asks him or polls or something like during training camp what weight he's at, right? Because then it'll imply like, did they ask him to lose a little bit of weight? Because then they're probably moving him back, or did they ask him to put on some weight? And then we'll know he might have to be a little bit more of a pass rusher. So,
he's gonna be
talk about this for a long time.
Yeah,
I'm gonna leave it at that. You can give your closing thoughts, but
no matter what he does on defense, he's going to be dynamite in special teams. Like what Jack Sanborn was doing in special teams last year, that's probably going to be Noah Sewell this year. Except Noah Sewell is going to have a little bit of a harder time actually getting crack in the field with the starting defense because of how set we are at the linebacker position now. Knock on wood, hopefully nothing happens to any of our starters. But it is kind of nice to have that idea of having an intriguing prospect kind of be that fourth linebacker kind of waiting in the wings. Because you never know what could happen. You never know what could happen in the next year or two. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good spot to close out. Overall, as somebody who's given polls a lot of flack in the last year, and some of it warranted, maybe some of it was a little nitpicky on my part because I didn't quite see the plan. I see the plan for sure now. You know what I mean? And I think people who might have been saying they saw the plan before, your confidence was high, but you know what? It kind of paid off. But just don't go on Twitter and grandstand. You look like a jackass when you do that. I don't know.
Just take those pancake-sized nipples out of your mouth, dude. Because we all know Poles is sporting straight fucking flapjacks.
Dude, listen. Poles can win us a Super Bowl, and that motherfucker's still waking up at 4 p.m. and just hammering Dorito sandwiches. Like Cool Ranch Doritos, nachos,
shit and brittle, dude.
Mixing them both, fucking slathering that fucking bread with mayo and just slamming turkey and ham on it. Like not going full deli meat like our boy Ted Phillips, but you know what? If he wins a Super Bowl, dude, I will fucking make him the best Dorito sandwich in the history of mankind, and I will hand deliver it to his house.
Yeah,
but dude, overall, Ryan Poles, you got to give you a golf clap. 2 drafts in a row that I've been a big fan of. Like I said, Jalen Carter, that was my fucking boy, and we'll see how that all plays out. But Darnell Wright, that was like the pick that definitely was like, oh, okay. Well,
if it was anyone else but Wright, everyone would have lost their mind. I truly believe that.
I would have. When I saw Darnell Wright, when I saw that,
it was literally the only thing that could have happened that would have made me happy. It was the only thing. There was not one other name that could have been called that I would have been happy about. I would have been not super mad if I heard Broderick Jones, but like if we would have drafted like a Lucas Van Ness or some shit, I would have lost my fucking mind. Shout out to the Green Bay Packers for sucking their own meat.
Dude, hey, and Lucas Van Ness, and this is confirmed from Packer fans. There is some strange family dynamics going on in the Van Ness family. Like a lot of Packers Nation is convinced that this entire family sleeps in one bed. I'm going to leave it at that. But that is not my words. That is actual Packer radio. Weeks after he's been drafted, they've still been beating this drum. So,
well, I guess we'll figure it out, right? Time will tell.
I mean, we've all seen the ending to that movie, but hopefully it's a different script. Anyway, I think that is a good spot to stop, though, before we go too deep down any more fucking rabbit holes. Good, solid hour and 15 episode. Anybody who watched, obviously, understand a little bit more of the cues. But if anybody's listening over on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, whatever you're listening on, be sure to rate the podcast. Goes a long way. If you're following us on YouTube, be sure to shoot a like on the YouTube video. Comment over there. We have Detroit Lions fans in our comment section. Let's
hear today?
No, he wasn't. I know for a fact he got the notification though. Like that motherfucker probably just ate so much.
There he is.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
No fucking way!
No way! Oh my god!
Don Burr has made an appearance.
Was he just been waiting in the wings this whole fucking time, dude? Just waiting for us to bring him up.
Dude, that is the perfect way to stop the podcast. It genuinely can't get any better than that. Detroit versus fucking everybody. Don Burr. Unbelievable. All right. This has been Barely There. I'm Duke Coughlin. Follow me at that pod guy Duke. That's Lucas Perfetti, the Ayatollah of Capicola, the Swami of Salami. Follow him at Lucas Perfetti 46. This has been Barely There. Don Burr's got meat, and
I literally genuinely cannot believe that just happened.
That's incredible. Bear down.
Bear down.